Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed our first talk of the morning. Hope you had a lovely lunch, a peaceful rest, and enjoyed praying the Regina Coeli with Father Lawrence Liu. Thank you, Father Lawrence Liu, for allowing us to be part of this and to spend some time in prayer with you and Our Lady. The speaker today is Leila Miller. Leila Miller is a Catholic writer and author whose passion is church teaching on marriage, family, human sexuality, and all moral issues. She is the author of Primal Loss, The Now Adult Children of Divorce Speak, Raising Chaste Catholic Men, Practical Advice Mum to Mum, Made This Way, which she co-wrote with Trent of Catholic Answers, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues, which is what Leila Miller's talk will be about today, and her latest book, Impossible Marriages Redeemed. Leila and her husband have been married for 29 years. They live in Phoenix, where they're still raising the youngest 3 of their 8 children. They've got 2 girls and 6 boys, 28 to 10. And they never forget to praise the Lord for the marvelous things He has done in their lives. Thank you very much, Leila, for being with us today. If not in person, virtually, in prayer and in spirit. We really appreciate the support that you gave us throughout this time of preparation. Thank you for your love that you've shown me over this period. It's been an honor to get to know you, and I really hope that one day soon, very soon, we will be able to welcome you in England properly and hug you. So over to you, Leila, and thank you.
Hi everyone, this is Leila Miller, and I am so glad to be with you, but so very, very sad that I can't be with you in the UK. And I really was looking forward to that and getting to hear all of your lovely accents, because you're going to have to put up with my American accent. A little bit crass compared to how lovely you all sound across the pond. Anyway, I am so grateful to Kiara for allowing me to still give this talk, despite the fact that I won't be over there with you. And that was actually going to be my first trip to England since 1984, when I was, I think, I was in high school. So this may be broken up into little snippets, or not little, but because I have kids downstairs and you never know if they're going to pop up or what's going to happen. So this is really interesting and it's going to be fun. So here we go. I kind of want to talk to you about finding your confidence, I think, in this culture. And the culture is so hostile to Catholicism and so hostile to our values. And the biggest obstacle, I think, that most moms face is confidence. Is that we just feel like, is there any way we can, our voice can break through what we're hearing in the culture? Are we really so sure about how we're going to say these things to our children so that they don't lose their faith? And the answer often is no, and people shrink back and they don't know how to face this onslaught of evil that is coming at your children and for your children. So number one, I just want to say we have to, as mothers, as parents, we have to kind of reclaim our God-given authority to teach our children, and to know that there is grace that comes with our vocation, with our position as moms. And so you have nothing to fear. The devil wants you to be very afraid and very insecure, and to think that nothing you do can make a difference, or that you don't have the right words to teach your children, or that they're not going to believe you, or that do you even really believe it yourself? And then you start to doubt, and that's not from God. So identify that and put it aside and say, no, I'm not gonna fall for that one. So the other thing, in addition to courage, that I would like to instill in everyone today is simplicity. The idea of simplicity, that none of what I'm going to tell you is very complicated. There are complications in human emotions, life is complicated, certain situations are complicated, but truth and holiness are simple. So simplicity is what we're aiming for, to remember that things are simple, the truths are simple, we're going to keep things simple, and holiness is simple. And even God, he is radically simple. That doesn't mean that he's not deep and incomprehensible, but there is a radical simplicity to love, to truth, to goodness, to beauty. And so if we remember that, then we're going to have an easier time with peace in our souls and understanding that really we're not asked to do something super complicated here in raising our children. So courage and simplicity, I want those to be kind of the running themes throughout what we're going to talk about. So I want to start, this kind of helped me put things in order with the three things that Satan is targeting today. And everything goes back to creation. Everything goes back to the garden, because that is the foundation of humanity. It's the foundation of mankind and who God made us to be. And that relationship that we had with God in the garden, that Adam and Eve had, was perfect. It was a beautiful relationship. We didn't lack anything. We had full integrity of our body, soul, intellect, our will, our emotions. Everything was in perfect harmony and integrity. And then, of course, we lost that with sin. But let's go back to that time of perfection, and let's remember what God did for us. So go back to the garden, and there are three things, and this is my formulation. I'm sure many other people have thought of it, but this is how I made sense of things. So in the garden, there were three things that God did when he created human beings, when he created human persons. So those three things were, first, he gave us life. He breathed life into Adam. And the next thing he did was he made us male and female. And then the next thing was that male and female actually was a marriage. That relationship, the first human relationship ever, was a marriage. So he created life, human life, he created male and female, and he created marriage. So you're going to kind of notice that those are the three things that Satan is attacking full force. And the first thing that we allowed the culture to take, and that we allowed Satan to win, is this idea of human life. So how did Satan undo the goodness of human life? Well, he allowed us to say, you can take life. You can take life. Abortion is a right. It's a natural right. It's health care. So he's undone life with the acceptance of abortion. A grave evil at the very basic levels of creation, of course. Number two, we're going to skip to marriage for a minute here, because the next thing he was able to do pretty easily after that, or around that same time, was the attack on marriage. That marriage, which has, I always say there's like three things that make marriage marriage. So the nature of marriage is that it's permanent, that it is procreative, and that it's conjugal. So how do we do away with those three things? Well, we accept divorce to do away with its permanence, and we have full-on accepted no-fault divorce, at least here in America, and I'm sure the UK has its version of that. Marriage is to be procreative or fecund. Fecundity, there's generation that happens through the marital act. There's a conception of children. That's natural to a marriage. It's fundamental to what God created. And so what do? Well, contraception. So we bring in contraception to make sure that it's not generative, it's not procreative. So that's the second strike against the nature, the very essence, the very nature of marriage. And then the third thing that we've done to get rid of marriage, the essence of marriage, is that we've said it doesn't have to be conjugal. You don't have to have marital relations to be married, because you can even be two guys or two girls, and they can't consummate anything. They can't have sex. It's actually biologically impossible for two men to have sex or two women to have sex. And so now we're saying that marriage isn't even conjugal. And what's really interesting to me, and actually I put this in the book Made This Way, I think I might have it in the first book, my first book as well, which is Raising Chaste Catholic Men. I happened to notice one day on the internet that laws in the UK on marriage have two sets of rules. One set of rules for heterosexual couples, a man and a woman getting married, and another set of rules for a gay couple getting married, a homosexual marriage. And those were rules about nullity. So civil law, of course, has always recognized that some marriages can be null. And one of the reasons that marriage has been null forever in civil law is because of non-consummation. If there's no marriage consummated, then you could say there was no marriage. If someone wants to come to the magistrate or whatever and say, we never had sex, so this marriage, I want out, it's null. And that would be a reason for nullity. That's also a reason for nullity in the church, but civilly as well. So I noticed that you can Google this, UK laws, what makes a marriage null, there are two different standards. One is for heterosexual, and that would be for non-consummation. So then in a parenthetical phrase, it says that non-consummation is null. Again, it constitutes a reason for nullity for a male-female marriage. But for gay marriage, it does not apply. That rule does not apply because, and we know what the implication is, because they can't consummate in the first place. So if they can't consummate in the first place, it can't be a reason for nullity. So you see there's two separate rules. And so it's a perfect way of actually showing that there is no similarity, there's no sameness between a male-female marriage and supposedly a homosexual marriage, because if there were, then the playing rules, the ground rules would be the same. And since they're not, we can see that clearly proves that these aren't the same animal. It's not the same thing. So you can't have two sets of rules for the exact same law or the exact same institution of marriage. But anyway, so we got rid of conjugality. So in that sense, Satan won for now. Culturally, marriage, he's able to destroy marriage. So he's destroyed life through abortion. He's destroyed marriage through the things that we just mentioned. He got rid of all the nature of marriage. And then the last thing is male and female. He created us. And so that has been the next big thing, which is male and female. Well, we don't know what that is. That's actually fluid. It's up to you to decide. It's up for every person to figure out. And just because you're born with this set of genitals, biological sex means nothing, and everything is fluid. So he's also gotten rid of male and female. So if you keep that in mind, that Satan is trying to destroy everything that God created in the garden, now you understand why we are such a confused, chaotic, depressed, despairing, mixed up culture, and why we need God more than ever. And we need to come back to these foundational truths so that our children are not completely lost in this strange, chaotic time that denies and defies nature itself. I mean, it doesn't get much worse to actually deny the basics of nature itself. And I will say, even things like, this whole transgender thing, it's so embedded in our nature to identify male and female that one of my favorite writers, Tony Esolen, Catholic writers, he said, it's so basic to us that that whether or not someone is a male or a female is the first thing we notice about them. It's the last thing we forget. So I may not remember what the color of the clerk's hair is in the store, or whether, what their name was, or what they were wearing. But I am going to remember whether I talked to a man or a woman. It's one of the first and last things. very foundational. And that's why it shakes us up so much if we see someone who's just completely androgynous. It's not natural. It seems so unusual, and it kind of is unsettling. And I find this a masterstroke in the Passion of the Christ, that Mel Gibson set up the Satan figure as a very unsettlingly androgynous creature. If you notice, that was why you were unsettled by that. Very androgynous. So that's in our nature. If you can remember that, then you can, in simple ways, begin to lay foundations for your children, because again, this is natural for them to understand. Life is good, marriage is good, male and female is good. It's in their nature to know this. So keep that in mind. Another thing that I just want to talk to you about is the 3 types of parenting. So there are 3 types that we talk about. Trent Horn and I in Made This Way. There's the permissive parent, and we see a lot of those these days. And those are parents who really almost seem to be almost afraid of their children, and they almost seem afraid of losing their children's love. It's very, very common these days. So that makes them permissive. And then another way that you could be a permissive parent is just really not having being a moral relativist and not having any grounding yourself in the truth. And so then you become let my child do whatever makes him or her happy. And of course, it'll never actually lead to happiness, but that's what the permissive parent thinks. And the permissive parent usually is taking care of his own passions and needs, and then doesn't seem to oversee a lot of what the child does. So that's the permissive parent. You don't want to be a permissive parent. Not good outcomes usually. Very confused children, especially if the moms are like the cool mom that wants to be really cool. It's like nobody wants to have the mom who's the cool mom. It's just cringeworthy. You want your mom to be dignified in some way and not trying to act like a teenager or dress like a teenager. So then another extreme is the authoritarian parent, and they seem to operate a lot on motivation by fear. So, they don't really know how to parent with tenderness or kindness. They tend to be more authoritarian, like, you're going to do what I say because I say it, and if you don't, you're going to get punished. And that's how they rule with an iron fist. And that's a mistake also. And a lot of times it has the same types of outcomes as the permissive parent, which is not good. Not a good relationship with the parent, rebellion. Both of those types of parents kind of lead to rebellious children in certain ways. And it's just a harsh way to be. And if you're a Catholic who's an authoritarian parent, they tend to then associate that with the religion. So like, oh, I had a mean and very unloving childhood, full of a lot of punishment, a lot of fear, and then they think, well, that is Catholicism, that's religion, so I don't want any part of it. So you don't want to be that kind of parent, because that's going to drive the child away from the faith. So then the middle ground is the authoritative parent, which is kind of what we call the friendly parent. And that's where you're always a parent first, but you're not afraid also to enjoy your children and be friendly to them, so that when they do grow up, when this is the part I really like, when they do grow up, you can actually be friends with your children because you like them, you've been a part of their lives, you care what they think, they get to not be afraid of you. Although believe me, a few times my kids have been very afraid of me. It's not always wrong, but you know what I mean. But that there is this balance between letting them be and feel loved and giving them a certain amount of freedom within the bounds of morality, and then but also placing that boundary and consequences, but you're doing it out of love, and they know this. So that's a really important way to parent, is to be that authoritative parent rather than the permissive or the authoritarian. So that's where we want to come down, right there in the middle. I feel like someone's walking in my room here. No? Okay, good. Another little 3-prong thing here that I want to throw out to you that I put in my first book Raising Chaste Catholic Men, which is the 3 rules that I actually have used in my parenting. I guess they were unspoken, unthought of rules until I actually wrote them down. By the way, I have 8 children. I have, let's see, the first 3 are married. The 4th is engaged. My youngest is 10, so we have from 28 down to 10, and we have our 10th grandchild is on the way. So everybody's so far kept the faith, married, good Catholics. And so I think that these rules help with that. And then there's no guarantee. Free will is always in play, and any of my kids could go off the rails at any time. And I certainly went off the rails in my lifetime, my young lifetime. So these 3 rules of parenting that I have sort of used my whole life of parenting. Number 1, that moral formation is the top priority. So moral formation is it for me. And this all presupposes and assumes that I'm already stressing and talking to them about and being in prayer with them, talking about the sacraments, talking about Jesus, making sure they know who Jesus is, making sure they understand their faith. That's very, very important as a foundation. So this kind of goes without saying that we're praying, that they see us pray, that we're never missing Mass, that we are practicing our faith in beautiful ways and in faithful ways. That's the other thing. If your children see that you are not faithful in your Catholicism, they're not stupid. They will know if you take your faith seriously or if you cut corners on certain moral issues. For example, if you miss Mass occasionally for no serious reason, if they know that you've limited your family size because you're using contraception, or that you just didn't believe that particular teaching, or they are going to catch on. And I can guarantee you, if you are not serious about the bare minimum of keeping you out of mortal sin, again, like Mass attendance and all the different precepts of the church and the 10 Commandments, if you are shirking one or more of those, they are not going to necessarily, they probably won't remain Catholic, because why would they? They know you don't take your faith seriously, and you basically do what you want. As long as it fits what you want, you'll do it. Then they'll do the same thing. Okay, so please remember that it's your job to embrace all of the faith and really live all of it. So moral foundation is the top priority. Once that other stuff is already a given, then it's about explaining and making sure that your children live moral lives. You're not more worried about their academics. You're not more worried about where they're going to go to college. You're not more worried about their status in society or any of that. So that's very, very important. Moral formation is the number 1 priority. My kids knew that. They have always known that I don't care what you end up doing in life, as long as you are a moral human being, as long as you are in a state of grace and you're going to go to heaven. That is the bottom line for what I care about. My number 2 rule is our beliefs and our principles have to make logical sense. First of all, that's how my brain works. Everything has to make sense. That's how I found my way back into the church when I was going to leave and become a Protestant. My mother said, find out what you're leaving before you leave it. I had been poorly catechized in the 70s and 80s. I found out. I actually then, she handed me a book of apologetics. I started to see that this was all logical. It's logical. No one ever taught me this, but oh my goodness. So things started to make sense. And if you pull one thread, everything falls apart, right? So all the tapestry of truth has to be in place. And so that is what your children need to see. Like, all this fits together. It fits together in one big tapestry of truth. So that's number 2. Your beliefs and principles have to make sense. And so therefore, if they come to you with a question and you don't know the answer, you can't just say, because the church says so, or you can't say, I don't know. I don't really believe it either, but the church says. Well, you can't do that. You have to find them the answer. And if you don't have the answer, go to Catholic Answers, go to the saints, go to any number of places, especially things, it's harder to trust things that say they're Catholic nowadays, but anything kind of this 1960s, you're going to find a real consistency there, and those questions will have been answered. And with things like modern day issues like IVF or contraception, things like that, even though contraception's been around forever, but there's good stuff on that. But just make sure you find a sound person who's really going to be faithful in those moral issues. So, and that's part of why we wrote our book, to make it really simple for you to understand the church's teaching and then how to apply it to teaching little kids and then big kids. So that's number 2. It has to make logical sense. And number 3, nothing is off limits for discussion. So if your child comes to you and has a difficult question, you cannot, I don't care if you have to act, I don't care if you have to pretend you're on a stage, I don't care. I don't care if you're dying inside, you're collapsing of horror of what this person is asking you, what your child is asking you. It could be a very horrible, very explicit thing. You need to meet them with pleasant gaze, listen to them, and make sure that you answer their question without shaming them, making them feel horrified. I had an 11-year-old son come to me once years ago, my son, and asked me about a term, 1 or 2 terms. And believe me, I'm no prude, and I didn't go to Catholic school, and I wasn't a good Catholic when I grew up. But he asked me something that I would have never expected out of the mouth of any sixth grader. And I just didn't bat an eye. And I kind of explained as best I could by not saying too much, too explicit, but explaining why or what kind of this thing that this person said was or meant. And in my horror, I didn't shame him for any of it, because he was just curious. He didn't know. And I sent him on his way, and he was perfectly fine, perfectly satisfied with that. And he knew that anytime he had something come up again that was horrifying or, difficult, he knew that he could come to me and that I would answer him and give him the truth, and that I would not shame him. Now, that's what we want, because the first time we shame our child for asking a question, or the first time they see on our face, you're asking me what? They're not going to come back to you. They're not going to come back to you. They're going to go to the internet, or they're going to go to their peers, and that's not where we want them to be. And I'm sorry about this lighting. I don't know. Okay. The sun is changing here. So when I say nothing is off limits for discussion, I mean that. And I also want to say that, and your kids will know that too, by the way, once they figure that out, they're not going to go to anyone else. They're going to come to you. Because again, it's made sense to them, because you're making sure everything makes sense to them. And because they know that, and you know that moral formation is your highest priority for them. So they will trust you. They will come to you because they really don't want to get this information from their peers. They really do want to get it from you. If they're too young to get explicit details about something, you can say that. Say, you know what, you're too young for me to tell you everything about this right now, but I will when you're old enough. But right now, and then you give them a kind of a generic or kind of a lesser or a more age-appropriate answer. And again, I don't know that we have time to go into everything like that in this talk, but that's, and I promise I'm not just trying to sell books. That's literally why we wrote Made This Way, because we wanted to give sample conversations and say, this is how you would address this to a young child versus a teenager, because they're very different. You don't want to disturb the latency period. So now we can talk about that. The latency period is what JP2 called the age of innocence. And basically that's from the age of about 3 to puberty, 5 or 5 to puberty. There's a document that I encourage all of you to read. You can print it off your computer, called The Truth and Meaning of Human Sexuality, and it's by the Pontifical Council for the Family. I believe it was written in 94, if I'm not mistaken. And it's guidelines for education on human sexuality in the home. So what to do as parents in the home. What were the guidelines that we have from our church? And so the latency period is extremely important to protect because little children aren't supposed to get explicit details about sex. And believe it or not, this is like it's almost unbelievable in today's culture. But I will tell you that when I was raising my first 3 kids in the 90s, the whole issue of homosexuality was not in your face. It wasn't on every kid's TV show. It wasn't in movies. It wasn't in schools. It wasn't in books in the library and little tiny kid books. It wasn't there. So it wasn't a big problem to keep that from them. But in this document, it says that you aren't even to mention the concept of homosexuality to a child before puberty. That's not even to be in their minds. And now imagine that today. Gosh, the culture has forced our hand so badly that our kids are being exposed to something that they aren't even supposed to have any knowledge of. And they're being exposed to it explicitly. So we have a real issue on our hands. So we have to try to protect our children and their innocence. And that's our obligation. And that document is chock full of words like duty, obligation. So even if we don't want to educate our kids in human sexuality, we have an obligation to do it. But we have to do it the right way. But that is part of our duty as Catholic parents. So I really highly recommend that document for everyone to get and print. So the last thing I want to talk about is the way that we, oh, look at that, interesting hair sticking up. The way that we teach our children, the way that I have taught my children, and I didn't know it had a name. I taught my children even from a young age, before I knew much about anything, even probably before I kind of reverted back to the real practice of my faith. I knew that, like I said, things had to make logical sense. So I taught in a way that I found out later in my 40s is called something, and that's called natural law. So I have been teaching natural law, morality to my kids 20 years before I knew it had a name. And so we have a chapter in our book that's just explaining what natural law is. And this is really sad that we have to explain it, because natural law is our patrimony as Catholics. It is literally what we have done, how we have taught morality for 2 millennia. And we've lost it in the last 50 years. And in fact, we have some Catholic writers who, actually the one that wrote this is no longer Catholic too, but she left the church recently, and it's not surprising. There are people who argue that we should put the idea of natural law teaching out to pasture, that it's just outdated, it's just not going to work these days. And the reason they say that is because everything is experiential and everything is feelings based and emotion based, and they're right about that, but that's no reason to get rid of natural law teaching. And so let me explain what that is and how we use it. Natural law is essentially asking the question, what is the nature of a thing? And if we use a thing according to its nature, things tend to go really well. And if we use a thing against its nature, then generally speaking, things don't go very well. We have consequences that we don't want. Disaster could ensue. Whereas if something is used according to its nature, that is, you'll find flourishing. So there are different schools of natural law and different ways that philosophers talk about it. I am not a philosopher. I am just a mom, and you can think of it this way. It's a really easy way to start teaching young children, because once they start thinking like this, they're not going to suddenly switch, or at least the foundation will be there for them to always think this way, think logically. Again, sorry, I don't know what's happening with this. I don't know, this lighting. You could tell a small child, and you could play a game with a small child and say things like, hey, honey, so what would happen if Daddy put molasses in the gas tank of the car? And the kid would say, what? That wouldn't work. And you'd say, that's right, it wouldn't work. Why? Well, because you had to put gas in the car. If not, it won't run. Right. Why? Well, because the car is designed to run on gasoline. That's not how a car is designed. To put molasses in is not how a car is designed. It won't work. And so things won't flourish. Things won't go the way you plan. Same way, you could say, what if mommy used, a chair to comb her hair, which right now I might need. But a kid would laugh. It could be a fun game. You're just like, what? Mom, you can't use a chair to comb your hair. Well, why not? Well, because a chair isn't designed to comb your hair. It's not what it's for. So if you use something against its design, it's not going to work well. You need something that's designed to comb your hair, and a chair is designed for sitting on, and that's how it works best. Same with, if I used a spaghetti noodle, a cooked spaghetti noodle to sew on a button instead of thread, oh no, that's silly, Mom, that's not going to work. That's right, it's not going to work. So kids, this is not difficult for kids to understand natural law, like that you use a thing according to its nature, you use a thing according to its design. And so human beings, remember, go back to the garden, human beings are made with a nature. Human beings are made with a design. Male and female, he created them. If we want to say that's not right and that's not how he created them, we're going to come up with a real big mess, and we have. If we say marriage is just a bunch of feelings and you can do whatever you want and marry whoever you want, well, that's going to lead to disaster. And we see it. We can see in our society, we can look all around us and see the misuse of human sexuality, because again, sex has a nature. It's for something. It has a purpose. If we misuse it, we're going to see disaster. And we do. We see it everywhere. We see that our culture is collapsing. Our children are suffering. You look all around, people are committing suicide at greater rates than ever. They have no foundation of truth whatsoever. They don't even know their own nature anymore. Families are breaking down. You don't have marriages in the first place. Kids don't have a mom and a dad. Like, everything is falling apart because we're not using things and using human beings, human sexuality according to our nature. And so teenagers especially, I mean, if you start teaching kids at a young age to think logically like this, they will understand. And teenagers, even, you can have them look around. You can teach them the things you need to teach them, and then have them look around and say, how is it going? How is it going when we're not using things the way that God made them to be used, and when our nature is being denied, and the nature of who we are as human beings and as sexual human beings is being denied. And they can see it. They can see that their friends are miserable. They can see that there's just so much cutting and drug use and drinking and sex, promiscuity and abortion and suicide. They can see it. So we just have to put it in context for them. And again, you have to have the confidence to do that and know that you're right, because that's how God created things. And so natural law, I want to give you a little line from, I think I want to say this first, what natural law is not. Natural law is not the laws of nature. Okay, we're not talking about science, like, the laws of nature are that, gravity. Well, yeah, that's what happens in nature. But we're talking about the moral way that we use things. So we have this line in here. For example, the law of gravity, which is science, describes how a falling bomb accelerates towards the earth. Natural law, which is morality, tells us whether it's right or wrong to drop that bomb on a certain target. So that's the other thing. Natural law can also be defined as the universal moral law. So it applies to everybody. It's the moral law. It's the design of things that applies to everyone in how we use morality. So and it's just as wrong for an atheist to commit adultery or abort a child as it is for a Catholic. Those are natural law issues. And same with marriage. Marriage is a universal. That's why Buddhists have always gotten married. That's why Hindus have always gotten married. It's innate in the natural law. Those 10 commandments are really for everyone, because it's the moral law. And again, I don't have time to get into why it's different from, the doctrines of the church, such as going to mass. Well, you wouldn't impose that on everyone because that's a revealed truth. But the morality of how we live is for everyone. Natural law is not what happens with other mammals. If it is, then we could eat our young and we can rape at will. So that's not natural law either. And it's also not what feels natural to me. Because then, it feels natural to me to go in and eat an entire mound of cookies in one sitting. That's not really moral. That's gluttony. Or a man could have a propensity to have sex with many women that aren't his wife. That's his natural feeling. Well, that's not what we mean by natural law either. So it's the universal moral law, whereas we use something according to its nature and its design. And that's how we've been teaching morality in the Catholic Church forever. And we need to get back to that because it makes sense. In a world that's full of feelings, we need to get back to truth and logic and reason. So I hope all that made some sense. I'm just sitting here in my room babbling and missing you guys in person because it would have been absolutely wonderful to talk with all of you. Bottom line, and I'm just going to leave you with this. The world has rejected Christ because the world rejects the cross. Nobody wants to suffer anymore. Nobody wants to persevere in any type of suffering, in any type of commitment to something that makes them uncomfortable. And so we have been brainwashed into thinking that if something hurts really bad, then it is not good for us. And yet Christ tells us, you take up your cross and you follow me. And we know where his cross led. It led to death. It led to, horrible suffering and death. And yet what that really led to ultimately was redemption and salvation. So if someone is whispering to us, look, it's just too hard, it's too much suffering, no one should have to do it. If they're saying that to your children, no, we are different this way. We are different because we embrace the cross. We're not afraid of the hard things. We're not afraid of living according to not our feelings, but according to the virtues. And the virtues are very difficult, especially at first, and they hurt. And yet, if you teach your children that this is why we're different, because we are here to show the world a different way that will lead them to something wonderful, rather than to what we're seeing all around us, this chaos that's leading their friends into something just really, really more painful, even though it promises happiness on the front end. It's not going to end up that way. So what we need to teach our children is to act according to their nature, which can be very painful at times. But if we act according to human nature and according to the natural law, we will end up being fully human. And that is the goal, is to be fully human and then to unite ourselves to God and to be with him forever in heaven. And Jesus taught us how that looks to be fully human. And it does involve suffering, and it involves the cross. And every saint knew this. So we look at every saint and we see that they understood this. But it's worth it. And the joy that will come is worth it. So be confident in your parenting. The sooner you as a parent become a saint, the better chance that your child will also become a saint and will grow in holiness. Because even if things are going wrong with your children, if you become a saint, James 5:16, the prayers of the righteous avail much. So the saints' prayers were more powerful than mine and possibly yours if you're not a saint yet. The closer we are to God here on earth, the more powerful our prayers. So it behooves us to become saints here for our children's sake, and we can help them even just with our prayers, even if we think that they're lost. Like we may have adult children that maybe they're lost. you're not powerless. There's great power in becoming a saint. Ask Saint Monica. So never be without hope. Hope is all around us. We were made for this time. We were made to be at this particular moment in history. Our children were made to be here also. Love your husbands well. Love them well. There's so much more to say, but I'll wrap it up and I will just say thank you for your time and your attention. Got a lot of things to do in life, and for you to take this time to listen to me is just really a privilege. Kiara, thank you so much for allowing me to have this time with your wonderful people. And hopefully there will be a time where I can cross the pond, or you guys could come here and we'll get together and be sisters in Christ, which we really are, and no ocean can really separate us. So God bless you all, and thank you again so much for listening.